namely Marichi, Daksha and Vashishta. These great personalities arranged for a great sacrifice for which demigods like Indra and the fire gods assembled with their followers. Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva were also present. We have an empty temple today, apart from Haripriya, who's taking out the decorations from Holi. And so I'm just going to read through this, read up till perhaps 8 o'clock, this chapter. So we've just started the chapter, Daksha curses Lord Shiva. And Prabhupada has just explained that the reason why Vidura is asking, why did Daksha, why was he so inimical towards Lord Shiva? And this is what this chapter is going to answer those questions. Why we know that Daksha curses Lord Shiva. So the question that Vidura asked is, why was he inimical towards Lord Shiva? And this will be answered in this chapter. The chapter is 35 verses. So I thought we'd just read through them and see if we don't get to the end, we'll just get to up until 8 o'clock. So we're up to text number 5. Tatra pravishtam rishayo dristvarkam eva rochisha brajamanam vitimiram kurvantam tan mahatsada. Translation. When Daksha, the leader of the Prajapatis, entered that assembly, his personal bodily lustre as bright as the effulgence of the sun, the entire assembly was illuminated, and all the assembled personalities became insignificant in his presence. Udatishtan sadayash te svadishnebhya savagnaya ritivirin cham sarvam cha tadvashakshitachetashaha. Translation. Influenced by his personal bodily lustre, all the fire gods and other participants in that great assembly, with the exceptions of Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, gave up their own sitting places and stood in respect for Daksha. Sarasas bhaktibir daksho bhagavan sadhu satgritaha ajam loka gurum natva nishashada taragnaya. Daksha was adequately welcomed by the president of the great assembly, Lord Brahma. After offering Lord Brahma respect, Daksha, by the order of Brahma, properly took his seat. Pranishanam ridam dristva nam rishyatad anadritaha uvachava mam jakshurbyam abhivikshya dahan iva. Translation. Before taking his seat, however, Daksha was very much offended to see Lord Shiva sitting and not showing him any respect. At that time, Daksha became greatly angry, and his eyes glowing, he began to speak very strongly against Lord Shiva. Purport. Lord Shiva, being the son-in-law of Daksha, was expected to show his father-in-law respect by standing with the others. But because Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva are the principal demigods, their positions are greater than Daksha's. Daksha, however, could not tolerate this, and he took it as an insult by his son-in-law. Previously also, he was not very much satisfied with Lord Shiva, for Shiva looked very poor and was niggardly in dress. Shruyatam brahmashayo me sahadeva sahagnaya sadunam bruvato vritam nagyanam nachadmatsarat. Translation. All sages, brahmanas and fire gods present, please hear me with attention, for I speak about the manners of gentle persons. I do not speak out of ignorance or envy. Purport. In speaking against Lord Shiva, Daksha tried to pacify the assembly by presenting in a very tactful way that he was going to speak about the manners of gentle persons. Although naturally this might affect some unmannerly upstarts, and the assembly might be unhappy because they did not want even unmannerly persons to be offended. In other words, he was in complete knowledge that he was speaking against Lord Shiva in spite of Shiva's spotless character. As far as envy is concerned, from the very beginning he was envious of Lord Shiva. Therefore he could not distinguish his own particular envy. Although he spoke like a man in ignorance, he wanted to cover his statements by saying that he was not speaking for impudent and envious reasons. Interesting, isn't it?
Did he allow the marriage to go ahead in the first place?
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I'm not sure about the circumstances of the marriage.
Yeah, before. Yeah, I don't know how he gave permission for Sati to marry Shiva. Maybe it'll be explained here. Or, yeah, I don't know. But it's interesting here that he's saying, I'm not speaking out of envy, but he actually was. You know that sometimes when people are telling a lie, they start by saying, I'm telling the truth. I'm not going to tell a lie. Yeah. I'm telling the truth. Ayum tu lokapalanam yashogno nirapatrapa sadbiracharita panta yena stabdena dushita. So here Daksha is starting to talk to the assembly about Lord Shiva. Shiva has spoiled the name and fame of the governors of the universe and has polluted the path of gentle manners. Because he is shameless, he does not know how to act. Purport. Daksha wanted to impress upon the minds of all the great sages assembled in that meeting that Shiva, being one of the demigods, had ruined the good reputations of all the demigods by his unmannerly behaviour. The words used against Lord Shiva by Daksha can also be understood in a different way, in a good sense. For example, he stated that Shiva is Yasogna, which means one who spoils name and fame. So this can also be interpreted to mean that he was so famous that his fame killed all other fame. Again, Daksha used the word nirapatrapa, which also can be used in two senses. One sense is one who is stunted, and another sense is one who is the maintainer of persons who have no other shelter. Generally, Lord Shiva is known as the Lord of the Bhutas, or lower grade of living creatures. They take shelter of Lord Shiva because he is very kind to everyone and is very quickly satisfied. Therefore, he is called Ashutosh. To such men who cannot approach other demigods or Vishnu, Lord Shiva gives shelter. Therefore, the word Nirapatrapa can be used in that sense. So, when I was preparing this class, I will carry on reading, but I was thinking about Lord Shiva and how we understand Shiva's position as the greatest Vaishnava, Shambhu. He's the greatest Vaishnava of the Lord, and why is Lord Shiva the greatest Vaishnava? Why is he so glorious as a devotee of the Lord? And we can understand, like we see Srila Prabhupada as our greatest acharya, you know, to see by an example of what a Vaishnava is. So what did Srila Prabhupada do? Srila Prabhupada, he took the message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and spread it all around the world. And he initiated and he gave shelter to so many people, to so many. And this we can understand as the actual activity of a great Vaishnava. Like that's what Narada Muni does. He travels around the world and he initiates people and gives shelter to so many people and instruction. And so Lord Shiva does this too. He gives shelter to people who to the lowest of the low, in one sense you could say, like to the people who would not normally be able to approach, who are not approachable, and they cannot approach very easily devotional service because they don't even have a form. You know, they have committed suicide or they did some heinous crimes, and so therefore they are not awarded a body. They're just floating in the subtle realms. And Lord Shiva is worshipped by them. Like he gives them shelter, and he preaches to them. So, and there are many, like we even know that the levels of suicide is so massive in our country, not to speak of the world. And so if somehow or other, I don't know how it happens, but if somehow or other they're able to take shelter of Lord Shiva, then they can, advance spiritually. So, and it's interesting because it's explained earlier in the chapter that Lord Shiva, another reason why he's the greatest Vaishnava is that he's non-envious. He's actually not envious at all. And he's, like generally, why is someone envious? People are envious because they see that another person is enjoying and they themselves want to enjoy. So when someone else is happy, they don't like to see another person's happiness, right? It is what envy means, isn't it? We're jealous of someone else's happiness. And you want to bring that down, or you want to destroy that, or else, you just have that negativity. So, and enjoyment is generally characterized, in the material world, in the human society, or any society of humans, whether it be demigods. I was talking to someone the other day who we were talking about whether the demigods actually fall in the realm of the 400,000 species of human. It was an interesting conversation, but I'm not sure how authoritative it is. But anyway, even in the demigod society, there is enjoyment, happiness is found in associating with, say, your husband or your wife with a house. You have a house, and you have a nice paraphernalia within the house, and you have children and all of that. So that's all like this kind of like expansion of existence that is so-called as the enthusiasm. It's the impetus for enthusiasm and material enjoyment. But we can see that we understand that Lord Shiva was famous for not even having a residence. He would just live under a tree. And Sati, like we were hearing in the first or the second purport of Prabhupada, Sati is, the meaning of Sati means the most chaste. And chastity is another word actually for celibacy. So they didn't have the same sort of circumstances that would normally be enviable. Sati and Shiva were, their service, so to speak, to the Lord is very different. It's and so Sati is the most famous for being the most chaste, and Shiva is the most greatest Vaishnav. So why, and due to their service, their almost unenviable service to the Lord. So the question that Vidura is asking is why was Daksha envious of Shiva despite all of that? And so we can understand also. It's very interesting. I'll just give a little bit of the class that I've prepared now that Hari Priya's there. But it is interesting to see, to witness or to read about how Sati became so disturbed by Daksha's treatment, her father's treatment of her husband. And this is what Vidura was asking. Vidura asks at the beginning of this chapter, why was Daksha so envious to the point where Sati leaves her body? She commits suicide. She leaves her body. And we also know of the other pastime when Chitraketu was flying and he saw Lord Shiva underneath the tree with Sati on his lap, and he was preaching Krishna consciousness to some of his followers. And Chitraketu himself was, travelling in his opulent aeroplane, and was displaying quite a bit of opulence himself, and so he saw Shiva there with Sati on his lap, and which implies perhaps he wasn't he may have been from a distance it looked like he was enjoying with his wife, and so he laughed at Lord Shiva, actually in a very friendly way, because Shiva and Chitraketu were good friends, and he was joking, he was making a joke about Lord Shiva, who was there with his wife, and so we understood, of course, we know that Sati then was very upset by that also, and she cursed Chitraketu. So those two examples of Sati getting disturbed by the defamation of her husband is interesting, because even in this last purport that we just read, that Daksha was wrongfully offended because actually Shiva and Brahma are of a much higher status than Daksha. They are, it's explaining here, that they are of a very high status. So Sati, of course, was aware of that. She knew her husband was Lord Shiva, that he was, a great Vaishnava. So her response to Lord Shiva's minimization is on point, because it wasn't just because it was her husband, it was because it was Lord Shiva. And so we understand from the first offence that we recite after Mangaladi is that to blaspheme the devotees who have dedicated their lives to propagating the holy name of the Lord is the first offence of that we must be very careful. The offence is indirectly a glorification. The reiteration of the offence is a glorification of and a reminder of who devotees are, that they are very, Krishna says that the devotees, the pure devotees, are more important to him than anything else in the whole of existence. And Krishna, we understand from the first verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam that Krishna is the cause of everything, and to think that he is responsible for absolutely every single thing, and at the same time he doesn't consider anything more important out of everything that he's responsible for than the pure devotees. So to offend or blaspheme a devotee that is very dear to of the Lord is a very dangerous thing, and so we can understand even that Sati was not necessarily motivated by fear that she was going to be, lose her spiritual life, of course, but she would have also had that realization. She had that realization that this personality was very, very great, and to minimize, to witness the minimization of a great devotee, the duty of anyone who has witnessed that is to act immediately. And so this is what she did. She immediately cursed Chitraketu, even though Chitraketu had not actually, because we can ask the question, why did Krishna allow Chitraketu to have to go through that whole curse and take that lower birth? Why did Krishna allow that to happen when it's even written in the Bhagavatam that he was only joking? He was just a friendly joke with Shiva, and even Shiva was not offended. He just saw that as a joke, that Lord Shiva was just laughing at him. It was like a friendly, almost loving thing. It was almost an acknowledgement of that divine couple, Shiva and Sati. It was just a loving laugh, but it was familiar. And so why did Krishna allow that curse to go right through? I mean, therefore there must have been some righteous behaviour on the behalf of Sati. And it was, because it's a complete lesson for us that that the Vaishnava is not ordinary, and Lord Shiva is not an ordinary personality at all. And so, and here we're going to have the same lesson explained to us, that Daksha's minimization of Lord Shiva and his impotency, really, because he was offended. He'd forgotten actually who Lord Shiva was, and he was puffed up by his position as the father-in-law of Shiva. And so therefore that's how this whole dramatic pastime comes about. So I might just read a few more verses, because it's just such an interesting chapter that it'll just be nectarine to go back and hear it again. But this is text 11. Esha me shishyatam prapto yan me duhi tur agrahit panim vipragni mulkata shavitra eva sadhuvat. Translation, this is Daksha. He has already accepted himself as my subordinate by marrying my daughter in the presence of fire and brahmanas. He has married my daughter, who is equal to Gayatri, and has pretended to be just like an honest person. Purport. Daksha's statement that Lord Shiva pretended to be an honest person means that Shiva was dishonest, because in spite of accepting the position of Daksha's son-in-law, he was not respectful to Daksha. And now we're going to hear actually these dreadful words from Daksha. Grihitvam rigashavakshya panim markatalochanaha prachutana bivadarhe vachapyakritanochitam. Translation. He has eyes like a monkey's, yet he has married my daughter, whose eyes are just like those of a deer cub. Nevertheless, he did not stand up to receive me, nor did he think it fit to welcome me with sweet words. Lukta kriyaya shuchaye manine binasetave anicham apyadam balam sudraye vo shatim giram. Translation. Here we go. Here's the answer to your question. I had no desire to give my daughter to this person who has broken all rules of civility. Because of not observing the required rules and regulations, he is impure. But I was obliged to hand over my daughter to him, just as one teaches the messages of the Vedas to a Sudra. Purport. A Sudra is forbidden to take lessons from the Vedas, because a Sudra, due to his unclean habits, is not worthy to hear such instructions. This restriction, that unless one has acquired the Brahminical qualifications, one should not read the Vedic literatures, is like the restriction that a law student should not enter a law college unless he has been graduated from all lower grades. According to the estimation of Daksha, Shiva was unclean in habits and not worthy to have the hand of his daughter, Sati, who was so enlightened, beautiful and chaste. The word used in this connection is Bina Setavi, which refers to one who has broken all the regulations for good behaviour by not following the Vedic principles. In other words, according to Daksha, the entire transaction of the marriage of his daughter with Shiva was not in order. So it's very interesting also that we are hearing, and this is often how Srila Prabhupada presents Vedic truths, Vedic absolute truths in the sense of principles. We read in the first few chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, when he's explaining Vedic principles, like of what happens when a woman's chaste is broken, or he was elaborating on Arjuna's presentation of his doubts to the Lord in relation to why he should not fight. We are hearing it from different angles. We are hearing from Prabhupada what the actual Vedic principle is, and then and then what Arjuna's doubt is, and then later on what Krishna's answer is. And it's the same here. So we're hearing about and how Prabhupada would say that all of Arjuna's arguments were valid. They were valid Vedic principles that were well known at that time, and that was how Prabhupada would purport those statements that Arjuna made. He would give, just like what he's doing here, that would validate what the person is saying, even if the actual final principle, that is the lesson learned behind what is said, is actually even the opposite. Like, for example, here we're hearing that Prabhupada is elaborating on Daksha's point that Sudras cannot receive Vedic knowledge because they haven't got clean habits. And so he is validating Daksha's points, even though they're actually spoken in envy and they're not true, because Lord Shiva was not a Sudra. So it is interesting how Prabhupada does that. Because the reason why does Prabhupada do that, I can only understand that Prabhupada's educating us on the Vedic principles at all different levels. We coming to this Bhagavatam with a very different education. We don't know why a Sudra, why a person who receives Vedic knowledge has to be qualified. Because he can't, but it makes sense that, in order to actually be able to hear, the mind has to be clear. And this is what Mahavishnu Maharaj, his points would be. He'd often push these points. That in order for your mind to be clear, your space has to be clear, your habits have to be clean, and then your mind is clear. And then you can absorb this knowledge. So it's practical. And, Sudras, it would be good to actually really research what the Varnashram and what the actual qualities of the different castes were and how they match up in relation to our own society. But the society that we were born in, our European society. But, it would be really good to thoroughly research that actually, but still, Srila Prabhupada just gives very, very brilliant and clear pictures as to why Daksha is saying this. Why is he saying it? And it's interesting because Daksha and Arjuna, they weren't fools. They were like, Daksha was fathering, he was fathering the whole future generations, and Arjuna, was not a fool either. He was giving very intelligent reasons why he shouldn't fight, and this is why Prabhupada is elaborating on it. So this education that Prabhupada's given us in this Srimad Bhagavatam is just so brilliant because it's multi-layered. We're getting a full education. We're learning about principles, and we're even learning about how to transcend dogma, how principles are often taken and applied to all circumstances. And this is what repels people from religious organisations, because it becomes dogmatic when you apply principles to everything. Yes, okay, thank you. So Haripriya is just bringing it back to the verse, the beginning of the chapter, because, it's getting a bit excited about the future purports. But yes, this is very important, because you're just bringing up the cause of envy. What is the cause of envy? Like, when you meditate on what other people have, isn't it? That's what you're saying? That and pride, because what Daksha was actually, he was not happy that his daughter had married Shiva because of his own pride. So he felt that it was a reflection of himself, because Shiva was like an untouchable in his eyes, right? A Sudra, this is why he's offending him like that. So so this is how the envy comes about. So we'll just go back there, and this is why Vidura wants to know, because Vidura wants to know why. This is what the actual result of this chapter will be. The conclusion we will understand why Daksha was envious of Lord Shiva, how he became envious, and why he was envious of the Lord, and why he was envious of Lord Shiva, and he was astonished about that. Especially because Daksha was not an ordinary person. He was a Prajapati, So, would you like to say anything about this, Prabhu? Yeah. Yeah, this is the Daksha curses Lord Shiva. So Daksha curses Lord Shiva, and then the next chapter is talks between Shiva and Sati, and that it goes back as before. So then there's a sacrifice. It's a really interesting canto, actually, the whole pastime. And this we've just started, and I just started to read. I read because there was no one here at the beginning, so I just thought I'd read. So that's why I just went ahead. And but we could probably stop there because it's 8:00. But I'll just read the translation and purport again of text 1, and just set the scene for the week, because it's text 1, chapter 2. Chapter 2, text 1, Daksha curses Lord Shiva. Vidura inquired, why was Daksha, who was so affectionate towards his daughter, envious of Lord Shiva, who is the best among the gentle? Why did he neglect his daughter, Sati? Purport. In the second chapter of the 4th canto, the cause of the dissension between Lord Shiva and Daksha, which was due to a great sacrifice arranged by Daksha for the pacification of the entire universe, is explained. Lord Shiva is described here as the best of the gentle because he is not envious of anyone. He is equal to all living entities, and all other good qualities are present in his personality. The word Shiva means all auspicious. No one can be an enemy of Lord Shiva's, for he is so peaceful and renounced that he does not even construct a house for his residence, but lives underneath a tree, always detached from all worldly things. The personality of Lord Shiva symbolises the best of gentleness. Why then was Daksha, who offered his beloved daughter to such a gentle personality, inimical towards Lord Shiva so intensely that Sati, the daughter of Daksha and the wife of Lord Shiva, gave up her body? So it's just such a dramatic story where Daksha is is performing a sacrifice later on, and he didn't invite Lord Shiva, and then Shiva was not offended at all. He just said, but Sati said, we have to go. And he said, don't go. So Shiva said, explains to Sati, and there's a discussion between them why she shouldn't go. But she listens, but then she just is so upset that she wants to go there and say something about why her husband wasn't invited. And then we can imagine, like, so she goes there and she's just so upset that she just consumes her whole body in fire. And then when Shiva hears that Sati did that, he's so upset, and he just brings all of his followers, and there's this big battle. So it's supposed to be, the sacrifice is performed to pacify, like it's explained here, or it was explained elsewhere, that it was performed to pacify the whole universe, and it ended up in this very dramatic, turn of events. So it's really good. It's a really, really interesting story, an interesting pastime, and ultimately for us to learn, that it's very interesting how Krishna is, at the same time, this all happens, but he's a little bit, even though he's within everyone's heart and he is the cause of everything, and he's the sanctifier of everything. In many of the pastimes, in the early parts of the Bhagavatam, he's not there, he's aloof from it, but at the same time, it's all happening. Like, how does he allow this to happen? How does he allow Sati for that to happen, for Sati to do that, and for even for Shiva to be cursed, and all of these things? How does he almost stand by and allow it to happen? Because there's lessons to learn. That's the reason, is that there are all lessons to learn for us, practical lessons. And then we can understand that this lesson is why we should not offend a Vaishnava or offend or minimize a Vaishnava. Yeah.
Since this is prevalent all over this planet, how is that showing? How is it happening? How is Lord Shiva? How are they able to take shelter of Lord Shiva? I mean, the world is just like quite a pitiable condition.
You see, because it must happen, because you have, like what happens is that when you commit suicide, you enter into the subtle realm, right? And so it's a bit different. I think with Sati, she took birth straight away again. She assumed another birth straight away. But for the ghosts and everyone in that realm, that is a reality. Like, it's a reality. And so, just like it's a reality that everything was going on in New York at that time in the 1960s, that was also a reality. The hippies and everyone just like leaving their, rejecting their rich life and going and living in abominable places in New York, just so that they could, associate with like-minded people who were just not wanting to go to war and not wanting to just like buy into all the materialism that had come up from the 50s and all of that. So hold on, so that I'll just answer your question, or not, just like what my understanding is, that just as Srila Prabhupada entered into that society, Krishna must arrange, association for those unfortunate living entities, because and we obviously, like, we weren't there in New York at that time, but it happened. So we're not aware of how it's happening, but it must go on. Like, they must actually somehow or other get the mercy of the Lord by associating with either Lord Shiva himself, or maybe, I mean, can't speculate, but it must just go on, just like it did on our realm. Yeah, and it said that in the scriptures. You see that I've read that Prabhupada wrote that Krishna even enters into the animal kingdom and reveals to the different animals at different times, according to his will. He reveals to them, and gets a following amongst the animal kingdom. So, yeah, it's very interesting and just quite colourful. Even all the sort of dreadful, sort of bizarre. What do you call it? What's that word? Not macabre, but the dreadful aspect of the material nature is also very interesting, isn't it? But I have to stop there. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Krishna Padaya, Krishna Prasad, Krishna Mukunda, Krishna. Class is normally about 7:30, isn't it?